Hi guys. Wow, I feel really privileged to have seen Anastasia and Bonnie talk, and I feel like we're going to be orbiting around a lot of the same kinds of themes. So this is me playing tug of war with a deer. This is a theme that kind of pervades throughout all of my work. Is this like sort of tension and this pull and push, and also I'm communing with nature, so you can tell I'm from California, the typical hippie. So I'm Victoria Shen. I grew up in San Francisco, but I've been living in Massachusetts, Boston for like 11 years now. During that time, I worked for a synthesizer company called Flower Electronics that specializes in analog modular synthesizers. And that was kind of the gateway for me going into improvisational noise music, which is what I do primarily now, not for money, but for fulfillment. And I've learned how to design and build instruments through this kind of gateway. And I perform solo as Eviction as my name, and then also in a band called Trim with my friend and drummer Dana in the back. So I'm just gonna touch briefly on my background, a little bit more on it, and then give you a whirlwind tour of the kinds of instruments that I use for my performances, and the kinds of circuits that comprises instruments, and why I think they're really important, and why they merit investigation, and why I think that it's actually really good for art and dialogue and conversation. So it all begins with Jessica, my mentor. So when I first moved to Boston, I was a fresh-faced art school kid doing illustration and printmaking. And then Jessica came along and she ran a workshop building electronics at museum school. And we were building these filters, and she noticed that my solder joints were really nice and shiny, so she offered me a job. And, and I ended up working for her for about 5 years. And during that time, I learned, I didn't just perfect, do an okay job at soldering. I eventually learned how to do printed circuit board layout design, reading her schematics and translating them into physical flat 2D boards, which is really fun if you haven't done it before. You're taking little parts and you're placing them in optimal areas, and then you're running traces between them, making sure that they don't intersect. It's kind of like a Bridges of Königsberg problem, if you're familiar. But anyway, so this is one of the instruments that she's designed. I helped design also the layout of the circuit boards and also like the colors and stuff. But one of the really amazing things about this instrument is that it's designed specifically for feedback patches. And when you do things with feedback, it's a dynamical system wherein, like, feeding back, I can get, even though I'm in the same place, different results, wildly dynamic results, just from having parameters that are stable. So that's one of the instruments. I'm just going to show you kind of a steady state using one oscillator, a low frequency oscillator, interacting with a different oscillator in the same instrument. Oh, and this is on an oscilloscope. Oh shit, it's actually not going through the headphones. Bear with me, I have an old computer, so when I exit from presentation mode, it's gonna hiccup for like a moment. And show, yeah. Yeah, 1 second. So, by the way, there's a handy, I work in AV, there's a handy little shortcut if you hit Option and then the speaker buttons, that's just going to bring up their system preferences. And I'm going to change it to headphones right now. Okay, so let me try this again. Here we go. Boom. Whoops, here we go. So, okay, we have a low frequency oscillator interacting with, I guess, regular frequency oscillator. And you see how there's this build and swell and this kind of like bursting of a bubble type of effect. So this is kind of like, this is steady state, but it is a little dynamical. I really like visualizing sound waves using the the oscilloscope because it kind of like demonstrates in a more palatable way like what's going on. This is the LBB. This is one of my favorite instruments. It's the flagship instrument for Flower Electronics. I think one of the best ways to use this is by using these two sawtooth oscillators and having them one control the CV in of another one, and you get some like crazy fucking slews and noise and like crackles and stuff too. And I really like the fact that it's all analog too, because then it's really it's even affected by the humidity of a room. And so I guess one of the unifying the unifying concepts that underlie all of these instruments is this idea of like chaos, of how you can have like a single equation, a set of parameters that are extremely sensitive to initial conditions, where you have one setting and then you get these crazy divergences. They're called bifurcations. So you've heard of the butterfly effect. If a butterfly flaps its wing in Brazil, it might cause a hurricane in Texas. I'm not sure if it's because of that story or if it's because of the Lorentz attractor that you see here that they call it the butterfly effect. But I'm going to take you to another oscilloscope video really quickly. Let's see. And this is a more vivid demonstration of chaos. And these are reading two different outputs of the flower filter. Sorry, it goes on for quite a while. Oh yeah, okay, so there it is in full bloom. Okay, so there we go, exit, yeah. All right, so just to reiterate what chaos is exactly and why I like it so much is the fact that in a chaotic system, you only need like very few parameters and you can get these wildly explosive results. You get these complex aperiodic sounds that are beyond your control. Oh yeah, this is the classic demonstration of chaos, which is a double pendulum, right? You'll never be able to recreate this exact path. It's like shuffling a deck of cards. Is like the chances of you ever getting the exact same order in that deck of cards is like there's like impossible. Anyway, so that kind of like these like vast ideas are like very appealing. And also, like with sound in a performance, if you're using a chaotic instrument, it's like very, very difficult to ever exactly reproduce something, and that in itself is fundamentally undermining like these classical ideas of control and mastery in music. And it's also it's liberating in a way that you don't feel this kind of pressure. Like growing up under a tiger mom, you get all these like pressures to like fucking like perform at your like apex like constantly, like just always like hit the right notes. But I think it's liberating to be able to like move past that and like get over the fact that you cannot always impose your own will and project your will onto a space. And that kind of attitude really closes you off from like being open to responding to a context or even like having these critical thoughts or these like surprises. So that's kind of one of the amazing things about using chaotic instruments are the constant surprises. And let's see. All right, so then this is the Benjalin. This is another chaotic instrument. It's not by Flower Electronics, but I did build it, so I'm super chuffed that I was able to do that. Let's see. So this is like the first instrument that I built by not just designing the layout, or I didn't really design it. it's I found this instrument at Worm Rotterdam, and I just fell in love with this thing. And it turns out that the layout design is available on PDF, just online, open source. And so I was able to convert it to a PNG and then CNC mill it out. And this is the result. I still have to take out all of the through holes from there. But yeah, this is the end result, and I have it right on the table over here. So yeah, this is an instrument that was designed by Robert Hoordijk in the Netherlands. It's designed to be bent or bent by design. And he says that this arrangement emerged from his effort to design an instrument that functions according to principles of chaos theory, where short to long sputtering patterns spontaneously transform themselves, at times gradually, at others quite suddenly, morphing into a new pattern, doubling and bifurcating. So this is this kind of like geeky, mathy sort of vocabulary that I'm very attracted to. This is it in action. All right, that's enough of that. Okay, I'm going to backpedal a little bit. So when I first graduated from school, I did this kind of ambitious project called Modernist Manicures, where I went to nail school for 6 months, and then I was working at a nail salon to get my chops up so that I can do these pop-up nail salons where I would invite people to come in for free, and we'd have a conversation about art. It was like a relational aesthetics piece, and directly addresses race, which I like almost never do. But it was like a form of drag and a kind of big fuck you to like modernism, at least the way that it's taught in art schools, as this way of as this like space of this apolitical art for art's sake space where it's abstract, so it can't be impregnated by meaning or politics or class or anything like that. It's de-skilling of the artist, and it's also these giant macho canvases. So this is my way of like kind of undermining that. Like I'm using these tiny fingernails as my canvases. I'm like skilling the artist because it takes a lot of skill to do that on someone's fingernail. And also, it's just like laden with like all sorts of like political meanings and signifiers. So that was my like big fuck you. But for some reason, these like modernist ideas like had permeated through a lot of like my following work, like a lot of my sound work. That's a Franz Klein. Yeah, and it's also pretty, like modernist art is not supposed to be pretty. It's supposed to be a little painful to kind of encounter. And you know what? I feel like there's a lot of simpatico between that and the kind of music that I like to make. And I think there's like actually a lot of potential within, with the field of sound using kind of these modernist techniques and strategies. So, de-skilling of the artist, how much work does it take to or how much skill does it take to turn a knob, right? Medium specificity. I think like electronics in itself and learning how to kind of like shape and manipulate electronics is a form of medium specificity and like finding the limitations and like enjoying the very properties of the medium that is electronics. An apolitical space, that's it, man. Is that noise is this thing that's like devoid of a sort of like agenda or like propaganda. I'm not trying to convince you of anything with noise. It's like actually your responsibility as an audience member to find your approach, your angle of enjoyment and engagement with noise and pleasure, and it's like creates this sort of like critical gap between the audience and like their ability to like perceive and understand what's going on. And I think visually it doesn't work anymore. Sorry, painters. It's like I've seen your shit at IKEA. I've seen it in hotel lobbies. It doesn't do anything for me anymore. It's like it keeps the complacency going. But I think maybe, in sound, there's still some like traction. There's still some radicality in there. There's like potential. So the figurative is burdened with meaning. Like so, sound as distinct from music is that music can transport you. It has a referent in history. So it's a form of escapism in a way, and I'm all about, avoiding, eluding escapism. Okay. So this is kind of what I was just talking about. No messy entanglements with romantic notions. And if you guys are familiar with Ragnar Kartjansson, the Icelandic visual artist, I always like, when I think about this, I just think about him like in his bathtub strumming on his guitar, like this macho rock star hero. But anyway, that's my personal baggage. And then, yeah, right. And it also dispenses with mastery and reproducibility, right? When you deal with a chaotic instrument like the kinds that noise musicians use. And yeah, I already said that. Okay, body and sight. So that's a great idea. Like, you can use noise to try and like bring people, transport them, not anywhere else but to the present. But unfortunately, your body is still attached, your identity is still attached, you're still someplace in space. So this is why you have to address these things like the body and the sight that you're operating in. So right, body specificity. In like my own performances, I sort of enact these sort of gestures and these positions that people aren't accustomed to seeing a small Asian woman doing. You know, like picking up like a bass drum, like acting kind of like violent, like, you know, posturing in these like kind of dominant stances. And also, you know, the suggestion of danger also brings people kind of to the present too. It's this like idea of like tension and this idea of like control or loss of control, because if you lose too much control, then you're fucked and you die, right? So, and then, yeah, so for instance, this is at Savage Weekend. My band, or our band Trim, played there this summer. So yeah, it's, I guess on to the end of like site specificity, there's a piano right there that we had like broken apart, and that's a sounding board. And it was in an abandoned house, and we salvaged it, and we used like the 4 smallest people on the planet to help us move it into a U-Haul. And then all the Boston people in North Carolina helped us like roll it into the venue during the most quiet set of the entire weekend. And then we put it on a furniture dolly, and then we surfed it into the crowd, and then we were jumping on it like a fucking seesaw. Well, anyway, so that's the text, right? And that's kind of like, okay, that's a point of poignancy. That's the sort of context. But then there's also this like subtext about like power and how like 2 women could like sort of like you know, take over this space pretty much, and take over this instrument that is like really unwieldy and really dangerous. Because if those things implode, it's over. I guess there's a lot of death, you know, in my thought, just like kind of like on the back seat. I never realized until just this moment. Anyway, site specificity. Okay, so in this instance, site specificity hall, I was able to perform at Boston City Hall a couple months ago. And I really wanted to utilize the space because it's this giant concrete box, right, that just represents bureaucracy. But anyway, so like just using it for its like acoustic qualities was like really important to me. So I took this concert bass drum, and then I hung it over the balcony over here, and I had contact mics, you know, flying up to the balcony here, and then one also from this landing area. And I was able to make what I call a very simple acoustic system, which is just a microphone, a contact mic, and a speaker. And oh yeah, I also I mounted this hammer onto there with a motor. Anyway, so yeah, that's a really simple way to get a dynamical system, is by using feedback, right? But the nice thing about feedback is that it is always specific to the space that it is occurring in, right? It's like so reverberant because of the qualities of the concrete, because of the distance and the spacing of the concrete. And that's kind of like a more formalistic, rigid way for me to like kind of explore site specificity. Okay, so how do we like resolve these 2 kinds of impulses? Like the impulse to like create something that is meaningless, or, you know, something that is sort of like a void, and then also something that is just heavily pregnant with meaning. So, you know, I like to think about it as like this difference between a void and a landfill. So like, where is this point that we create meaning? Like, where does nothingness become meaning? So I think, you know, having to make these 2 things face each other vis-a-vis is like the interface that we should be exploring to figure out, okay, like, why is it that this meaning is produced? Like, how does it operate on me? And it's like, maybe that's kind of the critical gap that I'm thinking about when you're looking at something or you're experiencing something that is not inherently meaningful. Like, in that your entry in that kind of atmosphere, like, what does it say about like yourself or about culture, or like, you know, these larger and also these microscopic kinds of questions. So I think that's just like a very skinny line that we should all be looking at and maybe like trying to perform in. Okay, so that's like the theoretical kind of stuff that I was thinking about. So this is the more recent shit that I've been doing, and like maybe you can help me understand if this stuff can be radical or if it's just like a masturbation. Okay, so this is a 0-player piano. This is an Arduino project that I've been doing where, okay, it's kind of like a modernist structural system because I'm taking all the parts of the piano. It's like an exploded piano. The string, the hammers, I'm just adding motors to them too. So this is kind of like a prototype for something that became a larger installation. Where are you, installation? Whoops. Get over here. All right. So this was installed in a concert hall stairwell. And I didn't want to bug people, so I made the composition a lot sparser. And this is an algorithmic composition that's non-repeating, like super mathy. So it's called 0-Player Piano Conlon's Game of Life, which is like a super fucking terrible nerdy joke on Conway's Game of Life, and Conlon non-Caro's player pianos. So, and this is not amplified at all. This is just the resonant quality of the stairwell itself makes it that loud. The stairwell, because it's like it's this metal that it resonates super well. And let's escape that. Whoops. Okay, Google Chrome, leave, and come back. Okay, oh, sorry. I went into PowerPoint just to take you out again. Okay, the other thing I've been making is these kind of precious objects, these pewter tapes. I put my first album out on these on tape, and I was able to take pewter and cast them into cassette cases and then put tapes in them. And they play. So you got these heavy tapes. I have one left over there. And this is a failure. It's always good to look at your failures. And then these are some of the nicer, more precious ones that I like. Oh, and then, okay, and then there's this object. All of like the object stuff that I do is like always related to sound. So I went to Japan this last summer, I toured there, and I found all these like cicada shells. It's like the most plentiful resource they have in Japan, beside beauty, you know, and then, oh yeah, sorry. Oh, spoiling it. Okay, so they're so loud and like they're everywhere, super pervasive, and they make this beautiful sound. And I was thinking like it'd be really cool if they're right up against your ear and you could use them as like earbuds or headphones. Oh yeah, so I took the shells back, I 3D scanned them, and then I 3D printed them and put headphones in them. Oh, and then I put lights in them too. And they operate in stereo. But I'm trying. This took me like forever to make, so I'm trying to figure out a way that I could like produce them in bigger volume with less time. Okay, so exit out of that. Okay, come back here. Oh yeah, and then there's stuff that I brought here, which are these vinyl cut circuits. I'm using them right now. So pretty much I take a layer of copper, and then I enter like an image, a flat image of like a circuit into a vinyl cutter, and it will cut out the traces on the vinyl. And then I paste it onto acrylic, and then I weed the negative space, and then I can solder directly onto the copper traces. And to keep them from lifting, I always flow a layer of epoxy on it. And it's really nice because you can see the color of the vinyl, or the color of the whatever substrate that I put the copper on through the acrylic. It's nice for troubleshooting shorts. And then they're programmable too, so I put microcontrollers on them. So this is kind of like a DIY Arduino. This is a microphone. Isn't that cute? A little teeny microphone. So I have these microphones and these earrings that I have that are that respond to amplitude of sound. So I hope to use them as like a dB meter, so you could wear them at concerts, and then if it's like too loud, you know, you need to put your earplugs in if 3 LEDs are going off. Yeah, oh yeah, and I've also been playing with putting images on the back of them too. So you can kind of see the outline of the traces, but at the same time you can see this like kind of Turkish figure too. But yeah, so just help me. I don't know if there's anything there, but it's still fun to make. All right, that's me. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Victoria. We're going to ask you some questions, if that's okay with you. Yeah.
No, no questions.
Any questions ready from other people, or I have a couple prepared too? All right, I'll start. So I was reading an interview with Jessica Ryland, and at some point she discusses how for a while she would only build circuits that looked visually like compelling to her when she'd drawn out the schematic. And clearly, like, there's a really strong kind of cooperation between visual exploration of circuits and sonic exploration. Can you talk a little bit about the interplay and how electronics can like act as the connecting point between these two?
I guess I think of electronics as just like a tool to, a tool to like realize an idea or something like that, or a tool to like just play and experiment and tinker in. And that's actually, you know, something that I wasn't really thinking about until I saw you two speak, Bonnie and Anastasia, is that when you have stuff like beyond your control and you're playing this liminal space, like there is an element of play there, right? And it's like, I don't know, I'm very preoccupied with being serious that I forget about like the ludic quality and like why that's really important. But yeah, that's just one avenue in order to accomplish something. Electronics is something that's like really inescapable. And I guess I would just say that the visual is something that's like that we're intuitively drawn to. It's like, what is it called? Apostasia or something, where you see Jesus on the piece of toast. So it's like we're only drawn to making circuits where we see Jesus in the toast. I guess is how I would explain it.
Any other questions? No? Yes. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about your interest. Part of your interest in noise was it wasn't as referential as visual media or even music. But do you ever find that it develops its own kind of self-referentiality obviously through the community and through your own playing?
Oh, real talk, yes, definitely. But I think that, noise is still so very niche that to a wider audience, it's totally like out there. But there's definitely like, if you're using like tape loops, or if you're using a specific instrument, like the pendulum's got a very distinct sound to it. Yes, you can probably like place things, like, oh, I realize it's like from, the Netherlands or something like that. But, aside from that, I think that there's still like a lot of potential to use these same instruments in like very different expressions. And so there's still like a lot more like terra incognito in that direction. But there is definitely a vocabulary that's being developed and a lexicon for noise. Though I think noise is relatively recent.
Sam hasn't asked questions yet, so Ted right after.
So you mentioned that you like noise allows you to kind of start from like a vacuous place, like no meaning, and it's hard to arrive at a place where there's no meaning, particularly when we're in a space together. There's kind of context. How do you think you kind of like navigate there? You're trying to find this gap, right, where between meaning and no meaning. Like, how do you even get
I think
there in the first place?
It's kind of impossible, you know. Two things spring to mind is that in I Heart Huckabees, Jason Schwartz is getting smacked in the face over and over again with a bouncy ball, and eventually he's like, whoa, and then they're like, what? And he's like, oh, there was nothingness for a moment there, right? So there's that. There's the orgasm is another way to like their little like moment of meaninglessness. And then also, I think really the best way to think about it is like through some Lacanian, like psychoanalytic way, where, you know, we're already sullied by meaning just by participating in language. And we're constantly kind of like seeking das Ding, that which is truth, but that is also which is meaningless. So it's just a constant, like life is just a constant search for that kind of like meaninglessness, or like meaning through meaninglessness. So, but it's like, we would be like, you know, pansies if we gave up. So we should always constantly, as artists, like strive for that. So that's, I guess, how I would think about it.
Yeah, it's a very different kind of question. Well, it just struck me that your work is a lot about making objects that other people could use,
Yeah.
And that seems kind of different from the other two presentations that we've seen so far. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are about like personalized instrumental systems, systems that can travel, you know, production, that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I think there's also a tendency within me to want to sell out and like, you know, be successful on Etsy. Like, you know, the nice thing about the vinyl cutter stuff is you can do flexible circuits too. So I'm trying to design a stop ticker choker right now. So this is just like a prototype. But I think it's a really it's probably the wrong thing to do. Like, if I really wanted to maintain my integrity, it would be the wrong thing to do, but I'm doing it anyway. So I don't know how to resolve that. Yeah.
I didn't mean to imply that was my question.
No. But it's all a matter of perspective, right? Like, from my perspective, I think it's wrong. But like from any like whatever tech bro, like that's definitely the avenue to go down. So it's just like, you know, like it's just novelty, right? So I guess. I don't really know how to resolve that except for it's like I'm a bad person.
Limited edition.
Yeah, limited edition, there you go. I can compartmentalize, you know, there's like some fun traveling like commodity stuff here and then some like high art stuff over here, so anyway. That's it. Okay, thank you.